Welcome you guys, I'm Robert Largent. I'm the environmental engineer for the exchange, and I'm going to explain to you what interstitial monitoring for underground storage tanks is and how we use it at the exchange. So I'm going to start off by explaining to you a little bit about why we have to use interstitial monitoring. In 2015, the EPA updated the underground storage tank regulations, and those now say that since April 2016, every new tank system put in the ground has to use interstitial monitoring as their primary method of leak detection on underground storage tanks. Some states had already enacted this prior to 2016. For instance, California, they enacted it in 2004, but they call it VPH, or continuous vacuum pressure or hydrostatic interstitial monitoring. So when you hear VPH in California, they're just talking about interstitial monitoring. There's just 3 different ways it can be done to meet the requirements for tank monitoring. So what is interstitial monitoring? We use the term a lot, but not everybody understands what it is. So double wall tanks are essentially a tank built within a tank. So when you see these things being built, they actually build them in 2 pieces, and then they build one inside the other. So the area between the primary tank wall and the secondary or outer tank wall is called your annular or interstitial space. So a lot of times you may hear older people that have been working in the industry for a while refer to it as an annular space, but annular and interstitial both mean the exact same thing. It's just the space between the 2 tanks. Interstitial monitoring, you have to use this method to identify any releases from the primary tank. Every tank installed since April 2016 has to use this method. Almost the majority of the exchange sites in the world use interstitial monitoring as their primary method of leak detection for their tanks. Here's basically what we're talking about. Interstitial spaces are just the spaces between the 2 walls. You can have, for the most part, our tanks that hold fuel are double walled. So double walls, you have the primary tank and then the secondary tank, or the inner tank and the exterior tank, and you have a wall between them. That's the interstitial space, this white area between the 2. You can have more than double wall tanks. There are some hazardous locations that have triple wall tanks. They store cyanide or some other really dangerous chemicals or hazardous waste. They may have 2, 3, 4, or even more walls to keep anything from ever being released from these tanks. For the most part, we're just dealing with double wall tanks at our sites. So here's a double wall steel tank. You can see the tank is built, the primary tank, and then they have a space between the primary and secondary tank, and that is your interstitial space. And that's being monitored all the time to make sure there's no releases. We're not going to do a whole lot talking about steel tanks. Most of our tanks are fiberglass. These are the 3 methods of leak detection for interstitial monitoring. First one is you have an empty space, so just a sensor in there, and it monitors for any liquids at all. The second one is hydrostatic. You have the 2 walls, and between the 2 walls you have some type of liquid, and that liquid is then monitored 24/7 for movement. And then you can have vacuum. Most of our European sites have the vacuum systems, and for a vacuum system, all you do is there's a light on the monitor. If it's green, it's good. If it's red, it's bad. We just ask you to monitor, make sure that you document every month that light's green, because if it's not green, you should have an audible alarm going off, but if the equipment hasn't been maintained well, you may just have a red light, and if nobody's looking at the red light, we'll never know if there's an issue. So in Europe, that's all you need to do. This is what it looks like when there's a dry annular space. It's just basically a probe coming into the dry annular space that goes all the way to the bottom of the tank. In steel tanks, it's on the end of the tank and it goes up and down in a riser. On fiberglass tanks, they have to fish it through the sidewall of the tank all the way down to the bottom, and then whenever they check it every year, they have to pull that out and they have to check it, make sure it goes into the alarm, and put it back into the tank. So it's a little difficult to work with. Sometimes they get stuck, but most of our systems don't have that. We utilize the hydrostatic method. This is what a Xerxes tank looks like before it goes in the ground. This one has all the risers on top of it, and that's the STP sump area. This is, if you look right there, that white spot, the white line between the two walls, that's your interstitial space. You can see how tiny it is. It's just a mesh area that when that's full of liquid, that mesh area, they monitor at the top of the tank in the reservoir area. So it's really easy to work with. And this is a cutout of what it looks like. You can see the liquid goes all the way up to the very top to a reservoir area, and then there's just floats on top of the reservoir that move up and down with the liquid. And if the liquid goes out, if there's a hole in the tank on the inner or outer, that set off an alarm, and if the liquid goes up, it'll set off an alarm. These are what the ends of the caps of different fiberglass tanks look like. At the top one, you'll see a Xerxes fiberglass tank, and the DW on the end means double wall. This is a Containment Solutions fiberglass tank, and it says double wall on the end, so those identify those automatically as double wall tanks. Here's a cutaway of the inside or the outside of a Containment Solutions tank, and you can see that they have monitoring fluid in the interstice, and that monitoring fluid is what identifies whether there's a leak or not. And here's what the reservoir looks like. You can see the liquid is stable at a certain level in the reservoir. The float sits on above or below it, and that float is what causes the alarm to go off. Here's a single point hydrostatic system. That means there's only one float in there. So that float moves up or down, and it causes an alarm to go off in your ATG. Your ATG is usually a Veeder-Root TLS 450 plus, and that goes into alarm. It should identify what the alarm is for and that you've got an issue in your float area. This is a dual point hydrostatic one, and this one will go off at different areas. If it goes up or down at certain levels, it causes it to go on alarm. Most of ours are dual point now, so we try to make sure that we identify any kind of releases, either if the liquid goes up too much or if the liquid goes down too much, then we know. So this is what it looks like. Your primary tank is where this fuel is stored. Secondary tank is your secondary containment area. You have a liquid in between the two that is created, they call it a brine solution or a liquid guide claw, and that is not supposed to freeze, or it's not supposed to move even whenever the temperatures change, because liquid can expand and contract with temperature changes, but this is supposed to be such a composition that it won't expand and contract and it won't cause false alarms. We still see a lot of sites that have false alarms based upon seasons because of external effects. You may have groundwater that moves up and down outside your tank, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. This is what it does. It just identifies when that fluid moves up or down. So if there's a leak in the inner or outer skin of the tank, your leak detection fluid escapes. So if there's a leak on the inside of the tank and it's above the fuel level, it'll drain into the tank and it'll cause this level to go down. If there's a leak outside the tank, so if the external wall gets corroded or corrupted for any reason, it'll cause liquids inside the tank inside the interstice to drain to the environment, and it'll cause the alarm to go off. So in normal conditions, your liquid should just maintain its level where it is at all times, and you won't have any issues, and you won't even know it's active. In other conditions, this is if it drains out into the environment. Now this is all resultant if the environment outside the tank does not have a high groundwater level, because a high groundwater level can cause liquids to go into the tank, and then it'll cause the leak detection system to go up. If you have it inside the primary wall of the tank, then you can have other issues. But outer wall, you got to keep your eye out. The groundwater may cause the liquid levels to change inside your reservoir, or if there's no groundwater, it'll just go straight into the environment. And it's not gas going in the environment, though. It's just the brine fluid, which is environmentally safe. So we shouldn't have any issues if brine gets into the ground. Repairing it can be a very difficult issue. Outside this primary tank or the secondary walls leaking are very difficult to repair because you have to dig down to them. If an inner wall were to leak, someone could go into the tank and actually fill those. So this is an example of where groundwater is over the tank top. Then if there's an outer tank breach, the groundwater goes into the interstitial area and will cause your floats to go, the reservoir to fill up with groundwater. Here's another example if the primary tank wall is breached. So if the primary tank wall is breached, either your fuel will leak out into the interstitial space, causing this to go into effect, or more likely the brine solutions will leak into your tank, which then will cause the alarm unit to activate and will probably set off your water alarms inside your tank. So one of the good things about the water alarms going off, they're supposed to be set so that if they go off, they automatically shut down your system so that our customers don't get water in their fuel tanks in their cars. Here's just another example of an inner wall breach and how it looks. So all this information that you're supposed to be following should be on your fuel system checklist. These were issued in May 2018 and they summarize the UST compliance based on EPA UST regulations. So if you ever have doubts of what you need to do, this fuel system checklist should tell you the things that you're supposed to be in compliance with. And one of the things that you need to be aware of is that all of the areas over here are APF. So all of these issues down here in the annual and triennial, those should be highlighted yellow on yours, and it should be explained down at the bottom somewhere that the yellow highlights indicate APF responsibilities. Now the two things that aren't APF responsibilities are the calibrate 6 months and the 12 monthly checklist that you're supposed to be doing every month. Of course, monthly is every month. We actually mean 30 days when we say monthly, but that's just so we can confuse you more. So your tank leak test, they're required every 30 days, and this is what this is the area that is indicated on your fuel checklists. These are the Veeder-Roots. These are the new Veeder-Roots at almost the majority of APHIS UST locations have the TLS 450 plus. Overseas, you may still have the Veeder-Root TLS 350, and in California, you may still have the Veeder-Root TLS 350s. We're hoping to get those updated someday, but right now, these are what you have. These are remotely monitored by Veeder-Root. They monitor over 190 of our locations in real time for our deliveries, our alarms, our compliances, and releases. So you should, if an alarm goes off and nobody's there, they should call and let somebody know that there's an alarm going off. The Insight 360 website, it displays all the data that your ATG or your Veeder-Roots gather. These are available to anyone on the installation to look. I mean, you can give access to your environmental POC on the installations or your FMO people on the installation. Anyone can look at these. They're read-only. They don't hurt anything. Nobody can change the settings or anything on them. Your environmental compliance information should be retrieved from Insight 360. Insight 360 holds 5 years of data. We want you to print the Insight 360 compliance page and place it in your binder number 2. And this is basically what the tanks section of your inventory or interstitial monitoring looks like. Basically, it just, all you're looking for is this to, on the end at the compliance result, to say normal. So if it says normal, that's all you need. And that's all you need to print off and place in your binders. So you print these, you paste them in binder 2 under the 30-day release detection results, and every 30 days you should have one of those. So you should have about 12, could be 13 if the month winds up a little weird, but this is where we want them all stored, and this is where you would lead the inspector when they come on site to look at these compliance results. We also want you to fill out your monthly compliance checklist, and underneath interstitial, just mark that everything's passing. That's all you have to do for the monthly checklist. So when you pull it up on Veeder-Root, the pop-up looks something like this. Then you click the compliance site detail at the bottom, and it'll take you to this page, and then you just print this off. There's a print button up here. You print it off and put it in your binder. So then you're covered for that month, and you're good to go. So this is basically interstitial monitoring of underground storage tanks and how we do it at the exchange. These are your exchange fuels team. You can reach any of these people, and they'll help you in these different areas if you need any assistance. I have a UST compliance YouTube page and LinkedIn page. You guys are welcome to get into it at any time. If you need information on any of it, you can reach out to any of the contacts listed on the previous slide. You can just go back and pause the presentation at that point. But we want to make sure that you guys have all the information you need to maintain compliance with your sites, to run your site, and not spend all your time trying to make sure you have your sites running well. So make sure you have your Class A/B operator certifications, and you're doing the things that we need you to do to stay in compliance. And reach out to us with any questions at any time. Thank you very much.